Hey, Barry Manning here. Welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Garden Report before the NBA draft. We're recording this just about 24 hours from draft day, and it came fast. Nathan Grubel is here to help us break it all down. And we need some experts because we haven't had time in the Celtics world, Nate, to help us. To break down prospects, to look at who'll be available. Who knows if the Celtics are even going to draft in the first round? Certainly possible, like last year, that they could trade back into the second round. There's money reasons to do that, but for now, they're at 30. Brad Stevens talked a little bit today about picking at 30 if there's a guy they like there. Same deal as last year, I'd say. So if there's a couple different guys they like that they think will be there in the second round, can move back and do that. And if there's someone they really love there, stay and pick. I guess they could move up, but I can't really see that happening. So I want to toss around some names with you. Some of the guys you think could be there at 30, some of the guys you like at the end of the first round in that area. Already started looking to a bunch of these guys. But who do you think is a name you like or a position you like that the Celtics should be targeting here?
Well, first of all, Bobby, thank you so much for having me on. You are correct. I'm sure Celtics fans are still popping champagne bottles everywhere, even after the parade's over with the championship.
Right.
So and well deserved. Congratulations to the Boston Celtics for pulling it off. I picked out 5 different names, and I'm not sure how you want to do this. If you want to kind of go back and forth style, if you want me to just kind of run through some names and then maybe you stop me. Yeah, we could certainly do back and forth. So first name I have written down, and again, these guys for me are in a range in that 30 to 45, right? So depending on if the Celtics are drafting at 30, if they decide to potentially move back a little bit, pick up an extra pick or two and draft somewhere in the late 30s, early 40s, these guys are all in that 30 to 45 range. So first name I have written down would be Jaylen Bridges out of Baylor. Curious if you've come across that name or if you've scouted him yet. 6'8", stretch forward, played at Baylor last year, made a significant percentage of his open catch and looks and catch and shoot threes, corner threes, legitimate NBA athlete. He can cover a lot of ground defensively, can make plays within the team construct. He is working to improve at making quicker decisions off the bounce when guys run him off spots. That is something I know he is actively working on. But I mean, listen, when you've got legitimate NBA athlete, 6'8", 41% from three, 9.5 attempts per 100 possessions. The volume's very healthy. The shooting splits are looking well in his favor. He rated out in the 94th percentile offensively, the 68th percentile defensively, all of these per Synergy, of course. Shout out to my friends at Synergy Sports. 40.3% on his catch and shoot threes, 43.8% on his three-point shots off the dribble. So any way you're slicing it up, this guy's got touch for days. He certainly fills a position of need that I would think the Celtics would be continuing to look at as far as filling out depth, looking at that 3-4 combo forward position. I mean, they're going to want guys at the end of the day that can knock down open shots, right? That's going to be the biggest thing. You want guys primarily who can knock down open shots. Maybe they're bringing a little bit of playmaking, passing versatility, which I'm sure I'm going to touch on with a few other guys that I have on my list. And you want guys who are going to either defend their position very well or they're going to be able to play defense within a team construct. Jaylen Bridges proved that at Baylor. He's a guy who gets his hands on the ball, can create steals, deflections, blocks. Showed a little bit of that at the NBA Draft Combine for anyone who hasn't seen his Baylor film specifically, but did get to watch some of the Combine, showed that off. So I really like Jaylen Bridges as someone who knows what his role is. He knows how to excel, and he's going to be someone who can slot into an NBA role right away off the bench as someone you can trust to come in and do their job in a culture, an environment where the expectations are for you to do just that, right? The Celtics don't have time to give someone minutes who hasn't proven that they can knock down shots or act comfortably in the role.
Yeah, and he's an interesting one. I think they've had him through for a workout. I want to say, yeah, he's on the list. So they've looked at him. They've had him in the gym. I think he fits a mold that they need, that they like. They certainly always like shooters there who can be a threat on both ends of the floor. He's interesting in 3 aspects to me. One, they have to start to look at replacing Hauser because on this roster, the cost of it, him becoming a free agent next summer, those are the kind of guys that are probably going to shake loose from this roster if you want to keep that top 5-6 together. So I do think that's, even more than big man maybe. and a position that they'll be looking at with that 30 pick at the very least. So I like that name. Other interesting thing to me about him and a bunch of guys I've looked at in this class is he's a guy who was in college for 5 years. So he's coming out at 23. Obviously a new dynamic with guys coming out of that COVID era and, getting extra years and stuff like that. You talked about him slotting right away. Is there a lot of upside here, or is this a guy who pretty much is who he is, you think, at this point?
So that's been probably one of the biggest challenges with evaluating certain players in this class, is that I actually just did this with my big board and I published it on social media before we came on this podcast. But when you look at guys and you start breaking them down in tiers in terms of evaluating their upside, do you see them with all-star upside? Do you think they have starter upside? Are they more so in the fifth starter specialist, sixth man kind of group? Are they bench guys? I see Jaylen Bridges as like a key reserve upside guy, someone who you're looking at as a seventh to ninth man coming off the bench. So it's tough to say, is there going to be a lot more there to unlock? He hasn't shown up to this point that he's going to be able to shoulder more of a creation heavy burden in terms of operating in pick and roll sets and being someone who you're consistently kicking the ball to and looking to find other guys and make plays for others, and someone who's going to be knocking down a heavy amount of tough shots off the dribble, not just 1-2 dribble pull-ups if the defense closes out a little too hard on him in the corner. So I think those are the types of shots, the open catch and shoot threes, the 1-2 dribble pull-ups. If he has a straight line drive to the basket, he can get there. He can finish with strength, finish through contact. I think you're looking at him more in that role player archetype. I'm not sure there's a ton more to unlock with him, but look around the NBA and try and find all the guys who are 6'8 to 6'10 knocking down shots at the volume that he was before he came into the NBA. And that's just such a valuable archetype to someone like Boston, where you can, I actually love that you mentioned Sam Hauser right off the bat. They have like 4 or 5 guys who were reserves for them, who we don't know if the Celtics are going to be able to sign all of them, given a lot of the cap constraints. And you would certainly know more about that than I would coming into this podcast, but they have a lot of decisions to make. And if you can find someone on a deal like a Jaylen Bridges, you can negotiate his contract, maybe even trade back. You get him in the second round. You're able to negotiate a team-friendly deal with him. That seems to me like such a valuable asset, regardless of if you think he has higher upside or not.
Yeah, and it's just going to be what they're looking for. Do they want to take a swing on a guy who has upside, who's young at the spot, or do they want a guy that can fit in right away? That's going to be the interesting thing to watch for. Obviously, last year, they went with the upside young guy who's probably a year or two away in Jordan Walsh. So might make sense to go with a guy who's ready, and Bridges definitely fits that mold. I'm glad you brought him up because I haven't talked a ton about him yet. Who is number 2 on your list?
So number 2 on my list would be Jonathan Mogbo from San Francisco. And he's an interesting player because we talk about upperclassmen, someone who has experience coming in. He has experience playing at the college level, but I think he's still raw in a number of interesting areas when we talk about what he brings to the table as a 6'8", 225-pound forward, one of the best athletes that we have in this class, someone who crashes the glass incredibly hard, transition threat, grab and go type of guy. He has some passing chops that he showed off at San Francisco in a number of interesting ways, had a really high assist rate, 24.5 assist percentage is incredibly high for a player in his archetype. The playmaking aspect, the ability to find guys on the move, his ability to operate in a number of traditional 2-point roles when we talk about as a pick and roll guy, someone who's cutting to the basket, lob catching guy, transition finisher. He has easy ways that he can score, but he's also consistently improving his handle and being able to break guys down and actually get to the basket on assisted looks. That part, as well as I know the jump shot technically needs to improve, but he's started to make some real strides in that area, and all of the workouts you're seeing leading up to the draft, he's becoming a lot more comfortable, not just hitting open shots from the corner, but also really working on his pull-up craft and getting the shots on the move rather than just spotting up from the corner on the wing. So we talk about someone who is experienced. He knows his role. He fits the NBA really well in terms of athleticism, size, rebounding, fits the type of culture that Boston's built. But has some upside of his own in areas that are still a little bit untapped, a little bit raw when we talk about scaling up to the NBA level. So he would be a really interesting flyer for Boston to possibly look at in that late first, early second round territory.
He's about 6'6", right? So
I think when it's all coming down to, he's about like 6'7.5", 6'8" in shoes. So
okay. Yeah, so that fits a little bit better if he's going to play some 5, and that's probably where he fits in, is that 5 position.
He can be a small ball 5. I do think he's going to be viewed as a 4 as well, right? As long as he's able to knock down some of those corner shots, how he's being used as a short roll playmaker. He can play alongside another big and hit them with a lob off of the short roll. So I do think there's ways to play him with another traditional big, or in Boston's case, I mean, Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, if you have another big who's stretching the floor for someone like Mogbo to operate in a pick and roll scheme, and then you're able to kick it out, swing pass to another shooter like Kristaps or Al Horford on the wing, why can't you play someone like Mogbo at the 4? So I think he can be used in multiple different ways.
Yeah, would be interesting to see if he could develop a shot, especially if he wants to play 4. And, I don't think 6'6" excludes him from the 5, if he's able to guard multiple positions. And, the passing, the ability to pass on the roll specifically, I think is something they really like. You see Kornet doing that. Kornet's a guy who could sneak away this summer, but, Kornet's doing it at 7 feet. So this is an interesting one. Maybe one of those guys that if they trade back, you take in the 40s there. Where do you have him slotted number-wise?
So I have him, like I said, I kind of have him in that 30 to 45 territory. I've actually moved him up. He's probably in like that 35 to 40 range for me. So not terribly far off, though, in terms of first round interest. And I mean, shoot, there's another guy that I have on my list a little further down who I thought he would have been a 45 to 60 guy about 2 weeks ago. And now all of a sudden you're hearing first round buzz from him. So if a team likes their guy, I've always been of the philosophy, don't worry about the number pick. Just go get your guy that you like and bring him in.
Right, and that might be the case in this class more than any other. It's a ton of different projections on this one. Is this like the widest range of projections you've seen covering the draft?
Yeah, so this class is really interesting, and I'm actually glad that you're probably the first host I've spoken with this cycle who hasn't immediately ripped the Band-Aid off right away at the top of the pod. What's the pessimism about this draft? Why don't people like this draft? Well, I would say that there's a lot of interesting talent to be found. There's certainly wide ranges in terms of consensus and what people are saying about where certain guys could go. But I think the pessimism is more so when we're talking about evaluating these guys, they do have swing skills that have proven to be more and more necessary in the NBA nowadays, like shooting, like being able to hit someone, make the next pass off of a live dribble. Some of these guys, even near the top of this projected class, have weaknesses in some of those areas to make you go, are we sure that he's definitely going to be an NBA player 2, 3, 4 years from now? Do they have these scary floors where they could be out of the league? I think there's a lot more of those quote unquote scary floors in this class than you would usually see when I'm thinking about ranking guys as potential all-star caliber players or starter caliber players. So when you have those types of outcomes that people can easily talk themselves into, you're going to see a very wide range for a lot of these prospects just based on that fact alone.
And for Mogbo, it'd be the passing, you would say, would be that bankable skill you're betting on with him?
So the bankable skills I'm betting on with him would be his rebounding, his transition play, his motor, and then, like we talked about, the playmaking as a secondary or tertiary playmaker in the half court, and even in transition as a live ball passer.
Yeah, and those guys are some of my favorites coming out of college in the past. Like, it makes me think of Nigel Hayes way back. Makes me think of Travion Williams a year or two ago now, who I really liked, who Boston brought in, but ultimately didn't have enough of an offensive game, I don't think, or a scoring game. I would say defensive question there too.
I think the upside play here with Mogbo is like, what if Jared Vanderbilt could shoot? I think that's more so what we're talking about, the upside with Mogbo, and I like where he's at with his jump shot more than I ever liked where Jared Vanderbilt ever was with his shot. I remember evaluating him in his draft class.
Yeah, so who is third on your list?
So third, I have Dylan Jones out of Weber State. And listen, I know plenty of scouts who have him firmly entrenched in their top 20s in their first rounds on their boards.
Really?
I know NBA scouts who don't necessarily want to look his way at all or have him in the 45 to 60 range on their boards. So it's funny you just asked that question about wide consensus among rankings of these guys. Dillon Jones is certainly a divisive prospect, but the way I see it is if you're taking a look end of the first round, 25 to 35, even in the 35 to 45 territory, why not take a flyer on someone who is a uniquely skilled power wing? He's flourished in his career as a pick and roll ball handler, both as a scorer and a distributor. He's adept with his handle. He blends the ability to catch defenders off balance and then power through them when they make a mistake to score around the basket, both facing up and even out of post-ups when he turns his back on guys. Is another one of these players, though, Bobby. Shooting is, again, the swing skill for Jones, at least as a catch-and-shoot threat. But the good news is that he did knock down 34% of his catch-and-shoot threes his last year at Weber State. So that is something that he's certainly continued to improve upon. And when you factor in how he's able to finish around the basket, someone who crashes the glass offensively, someone who can set guys up, make plays for others. He also posted a 31 defensive rebounding percentage, a 30 assist percentage, 3.2 steal rate, 55th percentile or above in all play types except for handoffs per synergy. So an incredibly versatile and uniquely skilled wing who he's not the burstiest of guys. The jump shooting can be a question, but you take a look at all of the other things he brings to the table, along with his basketball IQ and how smart he is. He's one of the better interviewers and film study guys I've honestly seen in this class. I think he could slot right into that Boston locker room, pick up a lot of what Joe Mazzulla is putting down, and I think they could find a role for him as early as his rookie season.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask with him is what would his role look like on a team, on a good team especially?
I mean, he's just another guy who, listen, you're trusting him that when the ball swings his way, he's able to catch somebody, take him off the bounce or power through him, and he's able to either finish around the basket, go to one of his patented turnaround hook shots, or he's able to swing the ball someone else's way. He's just another one of those wings who he's not necessarily taking anything from you off the table as long as he's knocking down his jump shots. Again, I'm confident that in a catch and shoot setting, he's going to. So he's certainly one of those guys. You're going to look for him to space the floor on the wings or the corners, and then you're going to be able to get him in a secondary action. Maybe you're running him off a screen, getting him into a screen and roll situation, put him in a secondary pick and roll action, and then he's able to spray it out to a lot of the other shooters that Boston has, or finish at the basket.
Yeah, and the shooting's interesting there. They're not opposed, obviously, taking Walsh last year to drafting a guy who's got some shooting questions, needs some shooting development, but the free throw numbers are good here, which is like what you always like to see in terms of maybe developing one. But I guess the tough part with him is he went 4 years without getting above 35%, which was his height in the second year there.
Sure, but at the end of the day, like you said, the free throw numbers are good. His willingness to get downhill and get to the line and really put himself in position to make the types of shots that he knows he can make. And I think that's one of the things with guys that sometimes goes a little bit under the radar is, do they put themselves in position to take shots that they likely aren't to make, or are they guys who they understand their strengths, their weaknesses, and they're going to set themselves up for good looks almost all of the time? And when you're a guy like Jones who averaged 21 points per game on efficient shooting, all things considered, I think you can trust someone like Dillon Jones to come in and provide a role for you off the bench. I think a good comparison to him would be someone who I know this guy didn't get a lot of burn in his rookie year, but the minutes he did get, and then in the G League, Colby Jones in last year's draft was a very similar player to someone like Dillon. I think Dillon's bigger. I think he's stronger. I think he fares better in terms of actually being able to guard up and guard wings. He's not just someone who you're sticking on an opposing backcourt matchup, but very similar offensive roles. Someone who, again, he's not taking anything away from you off the table. And as many of these guys you can put on the floor as possible who can be, dribble, pass, shoot types of decision makers and shot makers. I mean, those are the types of guys every single NBA team's looking for. And Boston in particular is looking for that skill set, along with guys who are very much willing to rebound for their position, crash the glass offensively when they have the opportunity to sprint at the rim from the corners. That's something that Dillon Jones, I think, can do for you at a good enough level in his rookie year. And if he continues to improve his shooting, if he becomes a better shot maker off the bounce, we're talking about someone who could be much more than a fifth option for you offensively, just given his playmaking acumen.
Yeah, and that's another type of player they've liked in the past. You know, those bigger guards, guys who have that size at that position. So he'd be interesting, especially where they try to fit him in. It's a crowded backcourt here in Boston. So that's something they're going to have to figure out in terms of bringing guys in and how those guys might fit in. But they gave J.D. Davison those couple of developmental years in the main system, and he never really broke through in terms of getting NBA minutes. So maybe they're looking this year to get a different guy in that position. I know they're looking at some two-way options. They might draft multiple guys. So maybe this is a guy in that second round range that they end up either moving up for or could maybe even fall. Again, there's a wide range on all these guys. So you don't know where any of these guys could end up. How high could you potentially see him going?
I could see Dylan Jones going in the 20 to 25 range. I really could. I think he could be one of those guys who is a absolute surprise on draft night, and we will see no short of surprises on draft night.
That's what I'm excited for. Yeah. Like there's going to be just some guys that pop up in the 20s and you're like, whoa.
We're going to see a lot of wild stuff. If people thought Ben Shepherd was a riser last year, then just wait for some of these guys who could pop up at the end of the first round Wednesday night.
All right, want to take a quick second. Shout out our sponsors here. Check out Prize Picks. WNBA still rolling along. I got baseball this summer. The finals are over, but still plenty of great players to choose from on Prize Picks, our official daily fantasy sports partner here at the Garden Report and CLNS. You can go over there and get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Just pick 2 or more players, pick more or less on their stat projections, and you are off with your daily fantasy team. It's that easy. So use that code CLNS for a 100% deposit match up to $100. And Game Time, our ticket partner here. I'll certainly be using Game Time for concerts, events, baseball games. Great deals on baseball games over there. My favorite part of Game Time is you can see your seat, where you're going to be sitting. These different ballparks. Maybe you've never been there. You want to see where you're going to be sitting and get that view down. So go over there, use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Of course, terms apply. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use that code CLNS to get $20 off your first purchase. Of course, terms apply. So let's move along, Nathan. Who is next on your list?
So next on my list would be the player I was alluding to earlier, who has seemingly seen a dramatic rise in where his draft stock sat from 2 weeks ago all the way up through now. The more and more gyms he's gotten in, I've heard nothing but glowing reviews on his workouts. That would be Enrique Freeman, the Akron forward, who,
and he has been in Boston's gym.
Listen, December, January, my good friend and No Ceilings, Maxwell Baumbach, pointed him out as someone who could be a real sleeper in this class, and I agreed with him then. I thought he was going to be someone who would be able to show out at Portsmouth. He excelled at Portsmouth, made his way to the NBA draft combines, showed out there, and now he's tearing up workouts, and everyone's loving his story in the draft as someone who worked his way up from the bottom at Akron, became a multifaceted rebounding forward. He's added to his face-up game each season offensively. He's continued to show progress as a spot-up shooter who's becoming respectable enough to pull out defenders so he can get downhill and attack. That's really been the biggest thing he's been showing in the workouts. He's been shooting the cover off of the ball. That's really enticing a lot of teams to look at him potentially in the late first round as someone who I think originally he would be thought of as a small ball 5, another forward similar to like a Jonathan Mogbo, for example, who we just talked about. But there's more and more optimism that as he's rounding out his face-up game and improving as a shooter, he could be a bigger wing, someone who can take guys off the bounce as he's improving as a decision maker. He's already a good finisher around the basket. He can turn somebody around, post them up, finish over either shoulder. I really like the upside here with someone like Freeman. And it's not, again, he's an older player coming in. He would be an older player drafted for sure. But you talk about these guys who haven't been in these blue chip environments where you kind of get a feel for someone by the age of 20, 21, what is their NBA career potentially going to look like if they keep putting in the work? I'm not sure we have a ceiling in place yet for someone like Freeman or some of these older players who have transferred up from the JUCO ranks and then they've gotten themselves in a college situation. Like Dalton Connect is a very good story of that in the lottery. I'm not sure we have firm ceilings on some of these guys. And so if I'm looking at someone like Freeman, who is a relentless worker, motors off the charts, plays much bigger than his size, good luck keeping that man off the glass. awesome interior finisher, 6% block rate, 57% free throw rate. So he's getting inside, he's crashing the glass, finding ways to get to the line, get good shots, relentless rebounder, very similar in terms of his offensive percentile rankings to Mogbo, someone who rates out well across the board, any of those traditional categories you would expect to see from 2-point range. And then this last season, he hit 40% on all of his jumpers and 34% on catch and shoot threes, 39% on unguarded catch and shoot threes. So these are all numbers. These are all metrics that a Boston Celtics fan would want to see in terms of if we're going the combo forward route, who would be some names that we're looking for? And I think those are a lot of reasons why Freeman's popping up boards and rising up mocks very rapidly to the point where I feel pretty good about him. Even I feel good about him going in the first round. Even if he doesn't at this point, I think he's definitely gone by 35.
Interesting. Yeah. Again, it's crazy how many different opinions you hear on where these different guys can go. So you look at him as more of a 30 guy than a 54, huh? And when it comes to Boston.
was, and listen, he was in the 45 to 60 range for me not that long ago, man. I'm telling you, he has really worked his tail off. He's been impressive. And a big part of this evaluation process is not just the scouting and what your eyes tell you on tape and what you're seeing in the numbers, but it's also the intel and what you're able to hear behind the scenes when you talk to NBA scouts and executives and agents and every single person involved in this wonderful disaster that we call the NBA draft. That intel becomes a part of your rankings and it becomes a part of how you're starting to view players through certain lenses. And the more and more I talk to people about Freeman, the more good I'm hearing. So there's no reason for me to have him in that range when I was already optimistic about his game. I'm hearing nothing but good things about him. Why am I keeping him in that 45 to 60 range? Why am I not moving him on my board and sort of setting the expectation for him to surprise some people when he hears his name called on draft night?
So you talked about him being a center at that college level. There's potential for him as a wing. What do you think that role will ultimately be for him?
I think ultimately he's settling in as like a 4-5. So someone who can play like a small ball 5 role, but ultimately I think he is a power forward at the NBA level. The good news is again, the progress he's making with his jump shot, he's going to be able to spread the floor. So he is going to have that stretch forward capability, someone who's not hampering your offensive efforts from that spot. And again, as he improves as a live dribble decision maker, someone who you can trust in a number of different areas, screen and roll guy, someone who can certainly get the right mismatch off the dribble in like a short roll scenario. So sets hard screens, crashes the glass, gets out, runs the floor, and shoots it. That's the type of player that, you would want to be able to bring off your bench as a 4-man in the NBA.
Yeah, you do see the improvement each year too. When you look at the shooting he added, free throw going up to 73 last year. And, trying 54 threes last year and hitting 37% of them. That's all,
it's not bad
stuff, encouraging stuff. Yeah, but another guy coming in 4 or 5 years there, you're like, all right, what's the growth ability here for a guy like this? And, at 30, it's so tough because you're Boston. You want a guy that can maybe slide in right away, but you're willing to wait on a guy who could take some development and, take some time up in Maine. And they've done that with a number of guys at this point. I like their ability to work with big men now. So that gives me a lot of confidence in them picking a guy who maybe can fit any different mold at that spot. Like they've been able to produce a variety of different big men within this system. And they've had a lot of different skill sets at that position over the years too. So I'm always excited to see them go with a big man. Robert Williams was a really exciting guy to watch develop over the years he was in Boston. So that's where I'm hoping they go at this spot. So whether it's Freeman, Mogbo, some of the other guys that are potentially at that spot, that to me would be the most exciting, the most interesting over the next couple of years to see how those guys would fit in Boston's system. But you have one more name on the list. Who is it?
I got one more name. That would be Kevin McCullar out of Kansas, who, listen, his injury concerns aside, because I don't have any concrete information on any potential medical red flags. I know I've been dropping a little bit of information on this pod, but I am not a reporter, nor do I expect to know everything that's going on behind the scenes. But if we're just evaluating his game up until he had some of those injuries in January, February, he was having one of the best two-way wing seasons in college basketball and was on his way to potentially being a player of the year for a Kansas team that was firing on all cylinders, certainly at that time. He's improved his spot-up shooting year over year. He's showed a knack for hitting big, tough shots late in games and in clutch situations. So if you're kicking him the ball late in the shot clock, he was actually hitting a good number of those shots for Kansas and was proving himself to be the type of clutch shot maker. And I think the interesting dimension about someone like McCullar, I know you're looking at him for a lot of the defensive upside, which can certainly be part of the conversation we have here, but past the spot-up shooting improvements, he actually shouldered a bit of the playmaking burden for Kansas when someone like a DeJuan Harris wasn't on the floor, right? He ended up being the guy who handled the ball, made a lot of decisions for them, had a 22.9 assist percentage, rated out in the 72nd percentile offensively, 84th percentile defensively, averaged 18, 6, and 4 on 45% shooting, 33% from three, 80.5 from the free throw line. So again, from where he started at Texas Tech, which was virtually non-existent as a shooter, to where he ended his career at Kansas coming into the NBA, his live dribble decision-making, his ability to defend multiple positions, crash the glass, get his mitts on the ball, make plays, create steal opportunities, deflections to get his team going in transition, high motor player, high character communicator. If Kevin McCullar is there in the second round, someone's going to take a chance on him, in my opinion, within the top 45. He could go as early as 20 to 25. He could end up in the 40 to 45 range. I highly doubt he falls further than 45. But if you're Boston, you believe a lot of the intel is good at pick 30. You trust his character, how hard he's going to come in and work, and you trust the improvements that he's made each and every year in college. Why wouldn't you try and take someone like that at pick 30? Because, again, we talk about these dribble, pass, shoot, defend players who crash the glass, who have a high motor. They're willing to do the little things. They're coming in, putting in the work every single day. McCullar fits that to a T. I think he would fit in with that Boston culture incredibly well if they want to go for that, 2-3 kind of swing wing type of position.
Yeah, and they obviously had a guy who helped them a lot at that position this year in different spots in O'Shea Brissett. So maybe that's a position they try to fill on the back line there and have a guy who crashed the glass, can hit some shots, but is more, overall an energy guy at that wing spot with good size. So that's a position they liked having last year. Again, a little bit of a luxury. O'Shea just opted out. So you have to fill that with young guys. You have to fill that with veterans. Those are all interesting spots on their bench into the future as some of these other guys maybe go and get bigger contracts or different opportunities to play more. That's the other thing, too, with Boston here is these guys coming in, the difficulty, the challenge for them is going to be finding a way to succeed without a ton of minutes. Obviously, Peyton Pritchard had his challenges in this situation through that. Aaron Nesmith, especially, who went on to have greater success in Indiana, didn't get a ton of run here. Romeo Langford, some of those guys. The biggest challenge in Boston overall for a lot of the draft prospects, even some of the guys who have been in Maine the last handful of years here, is that limited playing time. And some guys can handle that well. Some guys can't. And that's probably got to be the toughest thing to project for some of the guys who are going to some of the better teams, is that you're just not going to get as many shots. You're just not going to get as many minutes and opportunities. Your role might even change. So that's going to be a big part of the consideration for them too, is a guy who can adapt to a new role, a smaller role, or just kind of persevere through that development track.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, you look at the Celtics; they're locked into a 7-man rotation at this point. We know who the 5 starters are. We know Al Horford's the super 6th man, and with Peyton Pritchard being on that extension, we know those are the 7th guys. Playoff rotations, as we can see year to year, they're about 8 players max, and usually you are sticking to about 6 or 7 guys as you get deeper into the playoffs. So it's not necessarily about utilizing this pick or picks to find guys who are going to play for you immediately next year in the playoffs. But if you can find opportunities to get guys minutes during the regular season and you're able to get them to buy into the culture and what the Celtics are continuing to put together long-term, as some of these guys move on to other opportunities or they have to make some tough decisions, just given the roster and the salary constraints, you're hoping to have some of these young guys waiting in the wings like a Jordan Walsh, who you mentioned towards the top. Maybe you use one of these other picks and you have someone like one of the names we have on this list, or whichever direction they go in the draft this year, making selections. You're hoping to have some of those young guys for the future to be able to slot into those roles. Again, They're not going to be your star players. They might not even be your third option on offense, but you need other guys to fill out those fourth and fifth spots and even be key reserves off the bench. And that's what you're really looking to use these picks for. It's more so about next year's regular season. And then, 2, 3, 4 years down the road from now, who are the guys who you can count on to play key reserve minutes? I think a lot of the names that I ran through on this list of mine I have here, I think a lot of them can certainly are more than capable of buying in, filling a role on a contender, and fitting into the culture and the playing style of what Boston's built both these last few years and then as we head into the future.
So I'll throw a few more names at you rapid fire here, guys who have been in the building for Boston. Just see where you're at them, higher than consensus, lower than consensus. Do you like this guy? Are you not as high on him? So a couple of the other names you see here on this list, and a lot of the guys you mentioned have been through Boston, which is good, which is fitting. But some of the other ones you see there, Ryan Dunn, obviously another divisive guy people have a lot of opinions on. Are you higher on him or lower on him than you feel the consensus?
Ironically, he's number 30 on my board. So how about them apples, right? He's literally slotted right there. Listen, it's everything with him is going to come down to what type of offensive role is he going to be able to play for you? Because we know everything about the defense. There's nothing new I can say on this podcast that everyone hasn't heard before. I think the interesting with him is that everyone's looking for him to develop this incredible jump shot, which he may or may not develop. But I would invite people, although they're not similar athletes, Dunn certainly isn't a slouch athletically. I would invite people to look at the type of role that Amen Thompson played last year for the Houston Rockets, for example, right? Playing defense across the board, but offensively acting more of that five-man role where you're finding him on cuts, you're finding him in transition, you're utilizing him as a screen and roll type of player. I think if you're able to find ways to use Ryan Dunn in that type of role offensively, and it's not killing the rest of the spacing around you, I think everything you're going to get from him defensively could be a plus. And, if the creativity is there, if the vision's there to get him comfortable in that style of role while you're working on the jump shot behind the scenes, I think there's absolutely room for Ryan Dunn to be an NBA contributor within his first or second year. Wouldn't shock me to see him go in the late teens. Wouldn't shock me to see him go in the early second round. He has a very wide range.
Baylor Shireman, are you higher or lower on him than the consensus?
I'm probably technically a little lower because I have him slotted in that early second round territory on my board, but he's another guy who I have supreme confidence based on what I've heard. He's going to go in the first round. So technically lower. I think he could absolutely play a role for Boston as a big time shot maker. I think the thing we want to look for in prospects when we're evaluating them for the draft is who have these elite may not always be the best word, but who has these bankable, translatable skills that we know he can come into the NBA and do this from day one. We sometimes throw around the word shooting a little too loosely, but with Baylor, that is a solidified strength for him. He's not just pulling up from, 1 foot behind the NBA line or 1 foot behind the college line. He was pulling up incredibly deep from range last year at Creighton and knocking down those shots with consistency and with ease. So someone who, again, plays bigger than he is, averaged 9 rebounds a game in college, was someone who plays with toughness, plays with tenacity, plays with character. You can bank on the shooting. He may hurt you a little bit defensively, but Boston has so many guys who can defend their positions and help each other out and switch in different schemes. I don't think Baylor, giving him 10, 12, 14 minutes a night, whatever it could possibly be in his rookie year, I don't think he would incredibly tank them on that end, and getting his type of shooting in different scenarios off the catch, off the dribble would be a plus.
Pacome Dadier, an exciting name right now, an exciting watch too. He's a guy I've gotten to watch a little bit this week, seeing that Boston's worked him out, and ESPN has him slotted to Boston at 30. Are you higher or lower on him?
I'm technically higher on him than consensus. I wouldn't say by a ton, but he is a player who I've had mocked inside the top 20 on some of my more recent mocks. I think he's going to be one of those surprise picks that jumps up. Maybe someone like OKC shocks the world at 12 and looks his way. Maybe Toronto at 19. I think he's going to go earlier than pick 30. And the reason why I say that is that he has a lot of your prototypical wing build and skills that you can look for. But the thing that he excels at more than some of these other wing prospects you're looking at in the mid to late first round is he showed a real mid-range game overseas. And I don't think that can be understated. I'll reference my friend Maxwell again here, but he likes to say the mid-range is for stars. And I tend to agree with him, right? A lot of role players nowadays, you're expecting them to spot up from three. Jaylen Brown, there you go. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, these guys who can create their own shots and are comfortable, not just the ability to hit them, but their comfort level in actually taking those shots before we're even thinking about making them. I think Dadier certainly has that capability in his bag, and it can be a separator skill for him as he continues to grow in his NBA career. And it's a big swing skill between just being a starter or a key reserve versus there might actually be some like second, third option potential upside here.
All right, let me loop these last couple here together. You can pick your favorite. We got Justin Edwards. We got Harrison Ingram. We have Antonio Reeves. We have Trenton Flowers.
Harrison Ingram, easy. I have him in, I think, around 35, 36 on my personal board. Very, very underrated college season at North Carolina. And by the way, before this season, I was one of his biggest detractors because I just didn't think he had the ability to score the ball in any way, shape, or form, right? He would struggle on some tough bunnies around the basket. He didn't show a lot of proficiency in creating in the mid-range, wasn't a reliable three-point shooter, but he shored up all of those concerns this past season in North Carolina. I'm buying the long-term improvement. And then when you factor in how strong he is as a screen setter, as a combo forward, someone who you can have operating.
The Celtics love that. They're big on screening.
Absolutely. Dribble handoff scenarios, someone who can either roll to the basket or pop back out, someone who you can run some really fun inverted type pick and roll stuff with him as a ball handler, finding guys off the dribble. I think Harrison Ingram has a lot of versatility. He's not an elite athlete in terms of the burst and breaking guys down, but he is incredibly strong. Another one of these guys who rebounds very well for his position. I buy a lot of what he brings to the table. It would not shock me if he goes in the first round. I think ultimately he goes in like that early to mid second round, but I think he's one of these guys who has a chance. If we're looking at guys drafted later who could sneak up and get one of those all rookie second team selections, if they're in the right spot, they get the right minutes, the right role. I think Harrison Ingram could be one of those guys, and I've been much higher on him than I thought I would be throughout this particular pre-draft process.
All right, 3 more quick ones, rapid fire ones. Bigger picture in this draft. Who's your favorite prospect overall in this draft?
So he's not my number one overall prospect. My number one prospect is Alex Sarr. My favorite prospect is Stephon Castle, and he's been for a while. I was very high on Castle coming into this season. I kind of stuck with him as the year progressed, and he had some ups and downs, particularly related to his shooting, his unwillingness to take some jump shots, but he definitely started to turn a corner as we got later into the year. The free throw numbers ticked up. His willingness to take some of those pull-up threes, some of those catch-and-shoot looks ticked up. And when you factor in how strong he is around the basket, his strength in general in terms of rebounding, his on-ball defense and how he just keeps guys in front of them and refuses to let anyone score over him, his willingness to screen for others and how he could be utilized as a guard screener, I think is a very underrated skill in today's NBA game. He brings so much to the table that I can't let myself get down on the shooting, because if I just look across the landscape of these top prospects and I start to put some of these skills and traits on a list and I run down that checklist, I'm checking way more boxes for Castle than I would some of these other prospects. And that's why I'm not going to let those shooting concerns get me down. I'm going to hold him in high regard, which is why I have him number 2 on my personal big board.
You mentioned your number 1, Sarr. How good can he be?
I think if he hits his ceiling, you're looking at someone in between Anthony Davis and Evan Mobley. I know that's an incredibly high bar, but you take a look at what he brings to the table as a face-up scorer, as a jump shooter, someone who you're seeing him in workouts. He's very much so working on putting the ball on the floor. I think he actually showed a lot of that stuff off in the exhibition games against G League Ignite before the season, showed those flashes overseas in the NBL. And then defensively, he could be one of the more versatile defensive players we have in this entire draft class. So I know he's not good at some of the more traditional things for a big man, like, post-up scoring. He didn't post incredibly high rebounding rates in the NBL, but that was also a tough league, a tough situation for a lot of those next stars guys. I'm not going to hold a lot of that production against him. I'm going to look at the raw tools. I'm going to look at the player I saw in person at Overtime Elite and evaluate how he's actually improved since I saw him. And he's improved leaps and bounds. And I really do like his upside, his ceiling. I think if you're going to take a guy number one, first of all, if you're drafting a number one, you're looking for the best potential star bet, regardless. You're looking for best player available. I think that ceiling belongs to Alex Sarr. And that's why if I were in the Hawks position, I know there's been a lot of buzz about Donovan Clingan, I would take Sarr number one. We'll see what happens on draft night.
Yeah, and that brings me to the last one. Most underrated / biggest steal you feel like will emerge from this draft?
Oh man. Biggest steal. It's a great question. I think,
or most underrated.
If the Spurs take Devin Carter at 8, I think that could be one of the biggest steals in this class. And I was not very high on Carter through a lot of the process, but the more and more I dug in, the more and more people I talked to, the more comfortable I felt about his immediate two-way impact, someone who he's not a traditional point guard, but for everything that the San Antonio Spurs could possibly be looking for, playing someone next to Victor, I think he offers a lot of the skills that you'd be looking for in the backcourt. He's going to defend multiple positions. He's going to crash the glass. He's tough as nails. He's going to finish over guys. He's going to hit his open jump shots. I think if Devin Carter would be one of those types of role players that you would want to pair alongside Victor. So I think he could be the steal depending on the situation he goes to.
Love it. We put 5 new names on the list. Mogbo, we got Freeman, Bridges. Who are the 2 other ones we threw there? Dylan Jones
and Kevin McCullar.
So 5 new names to our list. Appreciate Nathan stopping by here. Where can the people check out your work, Nathan? Over on Twitter at Draft Deeper. Check them out there. Anything else you want to shout out?
Absolutely no. Draft Deeper would be the best spot to find me on Twitter. I'm publishing content leading up to the draft. I will have some things coming out naturally after the draft, but I do have a big project in the works. It's called Youth Movement NBA. Really excited about what that's going to look like in the coming months. We'll hope to launch that in September of this year. Don't quite know the final shape that that's going to take, but trust me when I say a lot of NBA fans, if you're a fan of the NBA and the young guys, if you're a fan of the NBA draft, if you're a fan of what's going on in the G League, you're going to want to check out what I'm working on next. So definitely stay tuned to my Twitter for all that information.
Yeah, love it. Love a lot of these voices. Love that draft community. Appreciate you guys being here every June for us. So great to meet you. Great to talk to you here today. And we'll be looking forward to your coverage tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Take care.